So I think I've completely played out the joke about not wanting to talk about COVID-19.
Well, truth be told, I'm getting a little sick of talking about it myself, but the authoritarian stupidity doesn't seem to be coming to an end anytime soon. And with governments using this pandemic as an excuse to violate people's rights, I feel an obligation to counter the bullshit any way I can.
But, Tony Spell definitely doesn't want to stop talking about it.
Dude, everybody and their pet goldfish doesn't want to stop talking about it.
It is currently his most favorite flavor of persecution.
It's also the government's most favorite flavor of persecution. Let's see, thus far we've had cops beat the shit out of a guy in New York for not wearing a mask. A lady in Texas gets sentenced to a week in jail just for not closing her business. And just recently on Mother's Day there were videos released of cops harassing people outside of restaurants.
So, let's talk about that.
Yes, indeed, let's talk about it.
We're going to be talking about Tony Spell. Now, this is a guy that I actually didn't know much about until he was brought to my attention by RCA. You might know him on YouTube as Reformed Christian Apologist. Now, he did his own video on Tony Spell, and I might be doing more than just the one video on him as well.
By that same token, there's a good chance I'll be revisiting this Suris guy in the future. He says some rather interesting stuff, especially about universal healthcare and the minimum wage.
But first, we probably need to talk about the thing that brought him to my attention to begin with, and that is the fact that Tony is a bit of a public safety hazard.
Probably way less of one than your precious government. I mean, these shutdowns are already having way bigger of a body count than the actual virus, between the starvation and the people committing suicide out of sheer insanity.
Now, of course, we've seen on this channel and in other places preachers who are incredibly upset about the COVID-19 lockdowns.
Wait, you mean people are upset that the government is dictating how they live their lives? Gee, you don't say.
And have been arguing to open up the economy and everything else as fast as possible.
Well, I'm not sure what you do for a living, Mr. Suris, but most of us have to go out and earn an income. The bills keep coming in. I mean, reality doesn't pause just because a few people are getting the sniffles.
Now, obviously, there are some people who've done this like Kenneth Copeland who are just wanting you to tithe more and more, but then there are people like Tony who I think actually want to accelerate the doom of the human race.
Okay, so nobody wants to end these shutdowns to, quote, accelerate the doom of the human race. It's because these people understand reality. Reality doesn't take a break because some people are getting sick. In order to have a stable economy, in order to have a consistent flow of resources, you have to have people going out there and being productive. If there's anything that's going to, quote, accelerate the doom of the human race, it's going to be these stupid lockdowns. The economy is going to become less and less productive. Less and less people are going to be earning an income, so the government's going to have less of a tax pool to draw bailout money from. I mean, how do these people think the economy works? It's not like a light switch. You can't just have things go back to normal after sitting idle for months at a time.
That's because it's one thing to be willfully ignorant about how pandemics work and try to make sure that everybody is outside of their houses and in your congregation, thus getting everyone else sick.
So, that's a risk they choose to take. If you don't think that's a risk worth taking, you don't have to go to the congregation. You can lock yourself inside. Instead of expecting daddy government to tell you everything to do, why don't you be an adult and do your own risk evaluation?
But it's another thing entirely to clog up the lines for your local police force, thus making any actual defense from your police operatives severely less effective.
Wait, he's doing that too? Alright, my man. I'm gonna buy this fella some beer.
How is he doing this? Well, our pastor buddy boy down in Louisiana decided that he wanted to keep holding his services at his actual church.
Yeah, it's his church. He has the right to do that. Unless people are being forced to attend these services against their will, there's nothing immoral about what's going on here.
Guy apparently didn't hear about things like Discord and Zoom. Those must be completely foreign to him.
What about people who are having issues with their internet connectivity? Because of these quarantines and shutdowns, everybody's streaming all at once. This is putting a lot of strain on the internet infrastructure, and as a result, a lot of people are simply experiencing connectivity issues. On top of that, many people simply can't afford the high bandwidth internet access you need in order to do things like stream live. There's an estimated 2 million families in the US that are still relying on dial-up.
What this either lack of technical know-how or inability to conform to any type of public safety has actually led to, though...
Let me stop you right there and add a little correction. This isn't a matter of conforming to public safety, it's a matter of conforming to the arbitrary whims of politicians.
Is Tony Spell being put under house arrest? Because not only is he ignoring lockdown...
Yes, how dare he actually defy the orders of politicians and go out and actually live his life.
He is getting hundreds of people to ignore lockdown as well, and thus cause greater harm.
I'm also encouraging people to ignore these these lockdowns. I encourage everyone to go out and live their lives as they please. If you feel it warranted to take precautions for your safety, like to shelter inside and wear masks in public, you knock yourself out. But if you want to go out there and be productive and earn a living for yourself, don't let some politician stop you.
Ideally, I shouldn't have to explain to anybody how this is actually perfectly acceptable under the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Well, I don't get my conception of rights from the Constitution. I believe rights exist objectively as a matter of logic.
It does specifically say peaceably assemble, and during a public pandemic, there is no peaceable assembly. Every assembly is dangerous.
If all the government has to do is label a situation a pandemic in order to be able to circumvent your constitutional rights, then why even bother having constitutional rights?
Now, Tony, he happens to be the pastor at Life Tabernacle Church. He has been requested to conduct his services online.
Request is a generous way of putting it. These stay-at-home orders are based on the authoritarian edicts of state governors, not polite suggestions. Now granted, in effect, they're basically suggestions because the resources to enforce these orders don't exist, but don't get that confused with the underlying intention of these orders, which is stay your ass home or else there'll be consequences.
As I said before, he has decided not to do that. Now, while being at house arrest means that this should be a perfect opportunity for him to hold those services online, he has instead decided to tell his entire congregation, which consists of hundreds of people, to constantly harass the police.
Well, considering the police are constantly harassing ordinary citizens like you and me, especially now with all these bullshit stay-at-home orders to enforce, it's frankly difficult for me to feel any sympathy for them.
Asking them to free Tony Spell. Now, under normal circumstances, this isn't exactly the worst thing in the world. This is because most free X-person campaigns happen over places like Facebook, Twitter. Sometimes people make a change.org petition in order to get people to try to do things. They sometimes go into the fundraising category for this. But no, in his infinite wisdom, Tony has decided to be the biggest nuisance to his police department he possibly can.
So what you're telling me is he's giving the police a taste of their own medicine? Man, is that overdue.
After being arrested on April 21st on charges including aggravated assault after an incident where he drove his church bus towards a man protesting his decision to hold church services.
Well, first of all, simply driving your vehicle towards someone in and of itself isn't immoral. You also have to be doing so with the intent to hit them. Like when I pick my brother up from school, I drive my car towards him, but I don't intend to hit him. Second of all, this person's kind of being a hypocrite. I mean, he's protesting this guy having a congregation at his church by having a congregation of his own outside the church.
After the police had, of course, cited him multiple times for violating shelter-in-place orders.
Most of which are based on dubious authority. Larkin Rose pointed this out in one of his videos, and I think more people need to think about this. A lot of state constitutions, under their emergency powers clause, don't mention any type of authority to force people to stay inside or to force businesses to shut down. None whatsoever. So the basis upon which these state governors have the authority to do what they're doing is rather dubious.
Tony decided he was going to get a little miffed.
Can you blame him though? I mean, everywhere you look, governments are expanding their power to dictate how you live over something that's statistically less likely to kill you than the flu.
At his house, he is saying lovely things like God gave you an immune system to kill the virus, which means he doesn't seem to actually understand how immune systems work.
And you don't seem to understand how immune systems work either. Having everyone hide in their homes like a candy ass isn't going to do anything to help people build up an immunity to this virus. However, if people are out and about, catching it, getting exposed to it, spreading it around, whatever, they're exposing their immune systems to this virus. And that's what helps build immunity, exposing your immune system to something. You see, your immune system doesn't just automatically know how to fight off viruses and diseases. It has to be exposed to it to learn how to do that. In fact, not only are these lockdowns delaying your immune system's ability to fight off this virus by limiting your exposure to the virus, they're also inducing a lot of inactivity and stress, which are both very bad for immune systems.
Now, after being put under house arrest, which if that has ever happened to you, you get this lovely little ankle bracelet that tells the police if you happen to actually leave your residence.
So not only are we trapping you on your own property, we're also forcing you to wear something against your will. When the government starts literally treating people like cattle, things have gone a bit too far.
Tony decided that this house arrest wasn't for him, and he ended up going to his local church and trying to preach there as well, even showing off his anklet to the people in his congregation.
Man, this dude has some serious balls. Not only is he giving government the middle finger by ignoring his stupid little punishment, but he's also going up to other people and showing them, hey, here's the bullshit that government wants to impose on me just for living my life. He's not only defying the bullshit, but spreading the word. Yet remember how I said I was going to buy this guy a case of beer? Now I'm buying him a whole fucking keg.
According to legal documents about the case, Pastor Spell spent over 7 hours at the church on Sunday while wearing his lovely bit of ankle jewelry. This, of course, is in violation of the court's order, because if you're under house arrest, you should be, arrested in your home.
So because you're violating the arbitrary demands of politicians, we hereby trap you in your own home. So where does the government get the right to do this? Like, none of us have this right. If I own property that surrounds someone else's property, even then I can't trap them in their own property. I have to give them a right of easement in that case.
This is, of course, much better and more comfortable than being in a jail cell.
So anytime you restrict a person's freedom of movement, whether that be on their own property or not, you're depriving that person of the right to live their life as they please, and are thus committing an act of aggression. It's wrong to cage people, even if that cage is surrounding their own property. Like I mentioned before, if I own property that surrounds someone else's property, that doesn't give me a right to just trap them there. They get a right of easement in that case.
So after ignoring court orders...
What, you mean someone doesn't have a right to dictate how I live, just because they have a hammer and a Harry Potter costume? You don't say.
And now being told that his bail will probably not be a thing he can even do because he's being held in contempt of court.
You can get held in contempt of court for literally anything. Like if the judge decides he doesn't like you, he can hold you in contempt of court. It's kind of like how police officers apply disorderly conduct. It's sort of a catch-all for anything that pisses me off but isn't actually illegal.
What else does lovely little Tony decide to do to be a nuisance to his local law enforcement and his local community, over and above, of course, getting hundreds of people sick? I started talking about COVID-19 on this channel by going after the Shincheonji Church.
I'm not really a religious person myself, but I really do appreciate the anti-authoritarian, individualist attitude being put forth by a lot of these churches.
So we all know what this kind of behavior leads to in the long run. This Louisiana pastor has now told his followers to jam up the police phone lines in order to protest his arrest.
This guy can set up a DDoS without even needing a computer. Eat your heart out, hacking community.
Like I said before, these kind of nuisances usually happen over things like Facebook or over Twitter. And in some cases, they are perfectly viable. I'm not trying to hold the police up on a pedestal.
Well, no, but you seem to be holding the government they work for up on a pedestal.
They are not perfect people. In many ways, it can even be argued that they are an extended branch of systemic oppression. But
coming from a guy who's advocating for systemic oppression, hey genius, who do you think it is that's going to be enforcing these precious lockdowns you love so much?
That's not the conversation we're having today. Today, Tony is saying that his congregants will keep on clogging up the phone lines, making any type of response to local law enforcement essentially impossible.
Well, that's kind of why we have the whole 911 system. The idea is that there's a direct line to the first responders that's only used for emergencies, thus guaranteeing that no matter what, you can get in touch with these first responders in an emergency situation. So they may be clogging up the police's regular public-facing lines, but they wouldn't be clogging up the 911 line that goes directly to the police.
Until they get the ankle bracelet off of him.
You know, I always wondered how difficult those things were to remove. Like if you would need an actual saw or if a pair of bolt cutters would suffice. Fuck, you know what? It's the government. There's probably like 2 screws you have to undo and you're good.
So in true whiny privileged snowflake fashion, playing by the rules that everyone else has to play by is not what he wants to do.
The rest of the Jews had to go off to concentration camps. What makes Anne Frank so special? The rest of the blacks had to sit at the back of the bus. What makes Rosa Parks so special? Simply arguing that everyone else has to abide by the rules in and of itself isn't enough. You have to argue why those rules are just to implement in the first place. And speaking of the rules the rest of us have to follow, I can't trap someone else on their own property if they do something I disapprove of. I can't force someone else to shut down a business I don't own. I can't make rules for somebody else's property. What makes government so special? They're not made up of gods, they're made up of the same homo sapiens as you and me.
He would rather play by his own set of rules that operate under the paradigms that he thinks are most apt instead of the ones for the society that he is living in.
So do you believe morality is contingent upon the society? If so, you're going to have some rather bitter pills to swallow. The Holocaust, the Soviet Revolution, Jim Crow laws, the KKK lynching black people, these were all things that were approved of by a society at one point or another. Ethics is not contingent upon society, it exists objectively and can be proven rationally, the same way logic and mathematics can.
A full-on denial of reality. So let's explain some of the problems with this, because I know there are some people in my audience who are very against the police, and I can understand that position. In some ways, I hold it.
Put the middle fingers high in the sky. Until the punk-ass cop backstage. Yo, Dre.
What up?
I got something to say.
Fuck the police coming straight from the underground.
But let's talk about some of the things that police can do normally that they cannot now. Let's say you and an abusive husband, for instance, are stuck at home for much longer periods of time. In fact, we've actually seen that since the COVID-19 outbreak, rates of domestic violence have significantly shot up. This is, of course, because locking people in the same house with their abusers has a pretty negative side effect on that situation.
It's almost as if these bullshit lockdowns you love so much have all these nasty side effects. And it's not just a matter of pre-existing abusive relationships getting worse. Because staying stuck inside for months at a time is not good for mental health, that'll wear on even the most sane people. Relationships that would have otherwise went on just fine are becoming abusive.
That's already an unfortunate reality to live in, and it sucks, and I feel for the people who live in that reality. But let's talk about how worse that reality is now with this Pastor Tony being a nuisance to his community. Let's say your abusive spouse ends up getting violently drunk. Now, not only do you have to deal with the verbal abuse and the sometimes physical abuse, now they can't control themselves. You are officially in danger. I mean, you've always been in danger, but now it's a little worse. In fact, it's substantially worse. You call 911 and try to get in contact with your local police precinct and see if they can offer you any aid. Get you out of there, get them sent to jail, something to protect you and your well-being.
So in order to protect me from spousal abuse, I'm going to rely on people who are statistically more likely to commit spousal abuse. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
But the line's busy. All the lines are busy. There is no way to get a call through. Now, your only way out, because it is not always realistic to ask for family members to help in a situation like this. Not everybody has friends around them that can help in a situation like this. Abusers tend to use things like isolation to prevent that. Going ahead and letting that out of the way before any of you geniuses in the comments section try to talk about that.
This guy obviously has never heard of apps like Self 411 that enable you to establish networks of friends, family, and other people to call on for help in an emergency. I'll put a link to a Copblack article about it in the description. It's actually rather interesting.
Your only real recourse here is to appeal to your local law enforcement to give you an out, give you some method of safety.
Hey Suris, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but there's these things called guns. There's these little metal tube-like things that fire off bullets and can be used to defend oneself against aggressors, however bigger or stronger they may be than you. You don't have to dial 911 and wait for anyone to arrive, you just pull it out and there you go, you have a way to defend yourself. Domestic abuse tends to be way lower in areas that have more gun ownership. Using guns to immediately defend yourself is way more effective than sitting there waiting for the police. The statistics bear this out.
But now, because one pastor is being a whiny little bitch and is crying his eyes out because he broke the law.
Well, again, breaking the law isn't synonymous with doing wrong. I've said this time and time again, but illegal just means a politician doesn't approve of it. It doesn't mean it's actually immoral. Granted, there are plenty of things that are immoral and illegal, such as theft, murder, and rape, but at the same time, there's plenty of things that are illegal that aren't wrong, such as smoking weed or drinking under 21.
Now, your husband, who, when he tries to break your jaw, will be breaking the law,
and also be doing something immoral, so you'd have the right to defend yourself anyway, the right to self-defense would kick in,
can't actually be responded to in any way, shape, or form. There's no way for the police to know that this physical violence is happening. And if you've ever called the police on someone for any type of physical abuse they've levied at you after the fact, even a few days after the fact, they generally can't or won't do anything about the abuser. They have to be called when it is a safety issue at the time. I would know because I have been in a situation where I have had to make such a call, and because the call was made several days after the actual incident, the police were not able to, or again, wouldn't do anything in that situation whatsoever. They have to be called when the public safety measure is at a boiling point.
Sounds to me like they're just finding excuses to skirt their responsibility. You know where you wouldn't see this type of behavior? Private security. Unlike the police, who are basically guaranteed funding and can do whatever the hell they want with minimal consequences, private security is beholden to its customers. If they try to skirt their responsibility in a similar manner, they won't be in business for much longer because their customers ain't gonna have any of that.
While I don't necessarily agree with that system, the reality is that is the system that they are operating under right now. And because of that, in the situation where this spousal abuse happens, which is a reality many people are facing right now, because Pastor Tony Spell is too busy bitching about an ankle bracelet that he earned himself, he's convinced enough people that it is a good thing to clog up the police force and make it impossible for them to respond to issues of domestic violence.
If you're making the argument that Tony earned the ankle bracelet that he has now, couldn't I make a similar argument that the police earned the campaign that they have on them now? Because let me reiterate, Tony was wanting to hold services on his own church, on his own property, with people who are voluntarily agreeing to participate. Nothing about what Tony is doing involves the initiation of force or a threat of violence. He might be increasing the risk that people get sick, but again, that's a risk that people are voluntarily agreeing to take part in. Tony is not violating the non-aggression principle. However, the police, by harassing him for making decisions regarding his own property with people who are voluntarily agreeing to participate, is in fact violating the non-aggression principle. So in my opinion, they earned the campaign as much as Tony earned his bracelet.
This is to say nothing about any other issues someone might be dealing in, like a robbery, break-in, some issue of child abuse, etc. All of these things are now put by the wayside because the police are too busy trying to tell Tony and his followers to please shut the fuck up. They can't do anything besides deal with this one situation because the congregation has made it impossible to go about this any other way.
Couldn't we put some impetus on the police as well, to maybe get their priorities straight? I mean, it's not like Tony's some kind of mass murderer. All he wanted to do was host church on his own property. If dealing with this fairly minor crime is making it so that the police are essentially inhibited from dealing with more serious crimes, wouldn't there be some impetus on the police to say, okay, you know what, we have bigger fish to fry, we'll just go take the ankle bracelet off this other guy so that these campaigners will leave us alone and we can go actually deal with more serious crime.
This is the point where I ask you guys, the audience, what do you think about a situation like this? What do you think should happen to Tony Spell?
I think he should have the ankle bracelet removed and the stupid arrest thing be over. As a matter of fact, I think this house arrest should be over for everybody, because if you think about it, the government kind of has house arrest not just on him, but on everybody. Now granted, in the state I live in, they are starting to lift some of the restrictions on these stay-at-home orders, and I think other states are starting to follow suit, but by and large, the country is mostly still locked down, and this needs to end soon, because if it doesn't, we'll start seeing more incidents like this, where citizens start butting heads with law enforcement. It's only a matter of time.
Should a similar type of harassment campaign happen against Tony, where his phone line is clogged so much that he can't think straight?
Well, if you want to organize such a campaign, good sir, feel free to knock yourself out. I'm personally of the opinion that two wrongs don't make a right. Also, keep in mind that Tony Spell can do something that the police can't. Change his number. That may be a slight wrench in that plan.
Is what he's doing an actual good thing? Is he fighting for his individual rights in such a way that the well-being of anyone else in his community should just fall by the wayside as unimportant?
Well, considering we all stand to lose our individual rights from these lockdowns, I'd say what he's doing is actually a good thing for the well-being of the public.
Let me know what you think in the comments section below.
I'll do you one better, good sir. I'm making a response video.
I know that for what it's worth, I think that this is an incredibly irresponsible thing to do.
Well, if you want to talk about things that are really irresponsible to do, isn't it kind of irresponsible for the government to screw over the economy and just push the burden onto the future generations that'll have to deal with the debt? I mean, there's only so much tax money you can collect when less and less people are working.
I think that solidarity with a person who you think has actually done no wrong, which mind you, in this case, Tony has, is generally a positive thing. But when that solidarity manifests in such a way that you make it so that your entire community can no longer be considered a safe place,
shouldn't it kind of signal to you that there's something wrong with the system where all you have to do is basically cripple one police department in an area and the whole area becomes unsafe? I mentioned this in that video where I respond to Joe Rogan in his interview with Dave Rubin. Relying too heavily on government to inspect and monitor and secure everything creates a single point of failure, whereas when that particular service goes down, everyone is more or less screwed over. Whereas in the free market, because you don't have one singular entity providing a particular service, there's competition, there's multiple firms. So if one isn't quite doing so well, or if something bad happens to one firm where they can no longer provide that service, there's others you can choose from. If anything, this is just another argument for my position that we should abolish the police and replace them with private sector security.
Ideally, someone would get to the point where they have to ask themselves, are we the baddies? Just like what's happened recently with all of the personal liberty protesters getting in front of hospitals, preventing patients from actually getting into the hospitals and aiming guns and all that other dumb shit.
Well, I do 100% wholeheartedly support all of these lockdown protests. I do agree some of them go way too far, and I certainly don't condone anyone getting in the way of first responders dealing with medical emergencies. From what I can tell, however, this appears to be rather anomalous. Most of these protests are in fact peaceful.
While I agree with their right to protest, and I agree with them being able to spout their opinion and have their freedom of speech and everything else, when you get to the point where you are endangering the safety of others, I start to personally wonder if you're the baddie. And if you're the baddie, why should I care about your plight? In Tony's case, I care not for his plight.
Well, going by that very same logic, I wouldn't really care for the government's plight. By forcing everybody to stay inside, thus increasing inactivity and stress, thus compromising their immune systems, on top of crippling their ability to earn an income for themselves, the government is essentially putting many lives in danger through these lockdowns, and under your definition, they would be the baddies.
I think that he's being irresponsible, stupid, and being a child. And because he wields a modicum of power, him having a childlike temper tantrum has real repercussions for the community around him.
So you advocate for an expansive government that has all this authority, yet at the same time, you're concerned about the very slight amount of power that some random dipshit has.
And hey, Tony, if you end up watching this video, maybe try being an adult instead of a little bitch. I'm sure a domestic abuse victim would thank you for that.
And Suris, if you happen to be watching this video, please stop advocating for a big, powerful, expansive government to take away our rights. Also, join me in the cause for having police replaced with private security. I'm sure a domestic abuse victim would be very grateful for that. Probably just as grateful as I would be if you supported me on Patreon or PayPal. Links in the description. Until next time, this has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.